I just come to the conclusion there are no coincidences. There are God-ordained happenings that just seem like David going and taking lunch to his brothers, and God says, I got something bigger going on today, but I'll let you know about it when it happens.
Community, today on In the Shadow of the Cross. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of In the Shadow of the Cross. I am Loren Rosser, and I am here once again with my delightful friends, Jim Durkin.
Hello.
And Michael Harden.
Hello.
So before we turned on the microphone, we were actually having an interesting conversation about community. We always try to come up with a topic to discuss, and every once in a while we'll throw something out there and it sparks a conversation before we even get the mics rolling. And so we weren't sure where this is going to go, but we thought it would be cool to jump into it. Some thoughts as we get started on this. There are so many things. You just go on Facebook, especially if you have like Christian friends and you go on Facebook. You'll see numerous memes to do with community. I just saw one today that said, basically, if you find the perfect church, don't join it. You'll ruin it. You know, then there's another one that said, I pull it up right here, says there's no such thing as a progressive Christian. You're either progressive or you're a Christian. You're either submissive to Christ or you're submissive to the culture. You can't be both. So these are the kinds of things I see on Facebook all the time. So we just thought it'd be cool to just jump in and start talking about community. There's so many directions we can go with this. One thing we did mention before we started rolling the mics was, what exactly is it that we're looking for when we talk about community? Jim, you had mentioned that if you could restate what you were saying about the different groups like Pentecostals, Catholics, what they're kind of looking for and how that ties into what we're talking about.
Well, what I was saying is that each person, when they say, you know, I'm looking for a community of believers, you know, that I can fit into, that I can belong to, whatever, they're generally speaking, I won't say this is true in every case, but generally speaking, that comes down to such things as worship styles. It comes down to like-minded or like set of beliefs, common set of beliefs. So, for instance, a Pentecostal wants to go to a church where others are Pentecostal in their expression and worship and whatever, and they believe in miracles and healings and speaking in tongues and so on and so forth. Then you have on the other end of it, you have your more liturgical churches, and somebody who's saying, well, I need a community, you know, of like-minded people. It's like, that means that you want to go and do the liturgy every week and so on and so forth. But in thinking about that would be kind of a very first level seeking community. We have, I believe there's, it depends on how you cut the pie, but we have 8 Pentecostal churches that would identify themselves as we are a Pentecostal church. We have 3 churches that are Catholic churches here in town. And it would not take a person very long to go to all 8 of those churches if you're Pentecostal and come out at the other end and say, I'm still looking for my community, or as younger people might say, my tribe, or you know, my people, or whatever. And so the question comes up that what is it when people are saying, I'm looking for my tribe, I'm looking for my community, what is it that they're really looking for? Because apparently it goes beyond just a worship style or you know, a format in the church service, the 1 hour, 2 hour church service. if you're charismatic, the 3-hour church service, whatever, whatever.
I feel like the
So,
Pharisee. Thank you, Lord. I wasn't born a charismatic.
exactly. So, community must mean something more. And the second thought that I had was that we get this kind of erroneous idea of what the church, the first century church was like. And when we talk about the first century church, we think we're talking about something that lasted hundreds of years. Um, the example given to us in Acts, where they went from house to house, they fellowship, the breaking of bread. They were all, I called it, they were all a musical happening every day, skipping down the lane, singing arm in arm, and everything is beautiful in its own way, and we get that from just a couple of verses in Acts. And then we call that the first. So you have a whole contingency of people who are trying to get back to community the way they did it in Acts. And so we have house church movement. And yet people are still looking for something on a much deeper level. So that's kind of my initial thoughts when even the word community comes up.
Those are really good thoughts, and I want to build on that. And so, Michael, you had shared something on the deeper on the side of what some people are looking for that doesn't even exist yet. Can you expand on what you were sharing before we turn the mics on?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I was saying is that currently in Christendom, there is no common unity. It doesn't exist. Okay, the ecumenical movement is, for all intents and purposes, dead. Interreligious dialogue is dead. There's just the doctrinal splits that are out there are infinite in number. Because again, if in modern Christianity you tend toward Gnosticism, so I need to find people that think like I do. I believe in the same things I do, here I am, I love Jesus, but I have developed a very non-sacrificial way of understanding the gospel. I can't go to church because I did try to go to church about a month or so ago with a neighbor. And it was like I needed intellectual ipecac. I needed something to cleanse my brain from this absolutely absurd sermon for 40 friggin' minutes on the first 2 verses of Ephesians. And it was more BS than I've ever heard in a sermon. And it was done with the authority of the Word of God. And it was just like, so I can't, but that's it. There's no common unity. So we're in a place of fragmentation right now. Christianity has been deconstructed. Okay. And you got people coming out of the woodwork writing books on, I'm going through deconstruction. You got others are going, I went through it and this is where I ended up. And none of them realize yet that they haven't ended up anywhere. Right. We are in the desert right now. Historical Christendom is in the desert. We are wandering. And all we're given right now is day by day manna. I really think that. And so, people will always go to where they got friends, churches where you make friends, and you got your friends there. And that's great if that's enough for you, for someone like me, that's not enough. I'm looking to join a mission. A congregation has a real mission that isn't friggin' agenda driven, whether to save souls from hell or whether to put food pantries in the community. I would be looking for a church or a community that is gospel driven. That to me would be very exciting.
Yeah. And then that opens up a whole nother can of worms in the sense of, like we talked about in the past, of what is the gospel. Right. We had a whole podcast on that. And so like on the surface level, so many people would say, yeah, most people, me too. But then you can run into the trouble of what is the gospel. For a lot of people, the gospel is sacrificial. Like, like you were just talking about, how there's such a move away from the sacrificial now for a lot of people, including us, that our definition of the gospel has changed.
Yeah, I think if I had to go to church, I would go to Catholic Mass, because the acknowledgement is straight up front. We are talking about the sacrifice of the Mass,
Right.
direct acknowledgement, whereas typical Protestant Christianity hides the sacrifice,
Yeah, I've full disclosure, I basically ended up at an Episcopalian church right now, just because, again, connections with friends who go there, and I do find the liturgy, the prayer is very beautiful. But like Jim, I very much believe in the gifts of the Spirit and things like that. So I'm kind of a charismatic attending an Episcopalian church.
Well, you never know if this is the era, this is the time when, as everything falls apart and tribes and clans and groups are split apart, if when we all come back together, that won't bring some kind of, I don't know, you know what I'm trying to say here? Some kind of new matrix where,
I have this kind of mental picture, if you will, of an architectural firm, and the head of the architectural firm telling all his employees, I want you to go out and I want you to come up with a concept for a building that it's like we've never seen it before, we've never done it before. And so they come back and they've got their their drawings and whatever, and they're and they're presenting it, and the guy's like, no, that's been done. No, we've already done that. No. And you got this one guy, maybe he's even the junior guy in the committee or whatever, and he's got something that is so radically different that they're all laughing at him. They're like, are you kidding me? It's like, who would ever come up with an idea like that? And finally he says, well, I don't care. I'm going to pitch it anyhow. And the top guy looks at it and says, that's it. That's what I'm looking for. Something that's never been done. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, Michael, is we're kind of in a something that's never been done place. We don't even know what it's going to look like.
Right.
But it's the structures of man, if you will, are kind of falling apart pretty rapidly, really. And you've got two groups of people. You've got one group of people that's like, I think this is God that's causing these things to fall apart. So I'm just going to wait before God to find out what's next. You got the other group of people that's out there with their mortar trying to patch all the holes, and let's fortify this brick and mortar church thing that I've got going on here, and get the coffers filled back up again and the seats filled back up, and by God, I can get it done. I'm the man for the hour. And so you got both things going on. In the meantime, you've got, by the millions, you've got people walking away from it saying, man, I used to be a dyed-in-the-wool whatever, and now I can't do it anymore. I need something more. So I think that something more doesn't exist yet, whatever that something more, except perhaps in heaven. And I don't mean dying and going to heaven. I mean, it's in the mind or the heart of God, but it's yet to be revealed in the heart and mind of men. I may be way off on that, but I don't think so.
It's interesting, Jim, because when you talk about people leaving, I remember I did that along with my friends David and Bob, did that series Church Outside the Walls back in that was back in 2006, and the stats back there were 13 million believers had left And now it's way beyond that. I want to say it's upwards of 20 million at this point. And back then we thought those stats were high, and now it's like even beyond that. We were just at the beginning of the wave that was forming on all that. And I thought it was interesting. One of the things my heart breaks for and goes out to are, you mentioned those leaders and church leaders who are trying to rescue the church, if you will, trying to, like you said, patch up the mortar. They see the people bleeding right out. They're trying to get the members, they're trying to build it up. And what an exhausting place to be. I mean, really, I feel for them, because it's, you see it as this huge tragedy, but really, I think it's like we've been saying, I think it's something the Spirit is doing. But if all you've been taught is the marker of the growth of Christianity is how many people are packing your pews, it's really hard to let something go into the desert that needs to go in the desert, especially if your livelihood depends on it. The more people that are in the pews, the more, security you have. That takes, I'm just going to be blunt, that takes some balls to be able to say, you know what, this is what God is doing. If God is in it, so be it, and he'll take care of me. That's not an easy place to be.
So let's turn to our historian, Michael.
Oh, what?
This can't be the only time in the history of the church that they found themselves at a place where change was necessary. And I mean radical change. I don't think the answers we came up with was always the best for the future of the church, but nonetheless. So can you take us through maybe a few examples of when things were progressing in one way, it kind of became obvious that change was necessary, and then what that change was and what the result of it was?
The best example comes from the New Testament. In the city of Antioch, somewhere between the years 48 and 49, the Apostle Paul has an encounter with a congregation who shares Jews and Gentiles in a common Eucharistic meal. And the Jerusalem church leadership finds that to be offensive because the meal is no longer kosher. So they send emissaries up. And in this contest, the Apostle Paul lost. And Jewish Christianity and Gentile Christianity cut a very important cord. And the reason that I say that is that for Paul, his whole mission, his whole vision was the reunification of the Jew and the Gentile. And so here they come in, and they just, basically what they're saying is this is an illegitimate mission. Okay?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, of course, even the closest of those to Paul left him. Now, that had a profound impact on Paul, that event. And he would write 10 letters over the next 3 years that we possess that reflect this event. Always in the back of his mind, but in Galatians it's out front. And as he talks about this cosmic reconciliation of Jew and Gentile, it's always for Paul. Okay, so there was a structural change there, and it's no surprise that 20 years later, after Jerusalem falls, the Jewish Christians head east, and the Gentile Christian bodies, believers, tend to take over the leadership role of the local congregations. And so by the time, we hit the end of the first century, Jewish Christianity has fled east into, Edessa and Perea and what is now Iran, Iraq. The church from that point on suffered because it had cut the cord with its mother, its history. So that we could do that. And we could talk about, okay, structural change. Well, not so much a structural change, but a change in vision. And we see this powerfully in the gospel narrative and Paul and the writer of John. Now, as far as structural changes go, we have to note that the very first and earliest example of a so-called church building is in Eurodoropus around the year 250. And this is really nothing more than a larger house with one room dedicated to worship. And there's your house church, Loren, right?
Right.
Yeah, Graydon Snyder has done the best work here on this. Well, anyway, now if you move from house church, then you get to Constantine. And Constantine's mom wants to build a big church in Jerusalem. And now churches are starting to be built. Bigger churches to accommodate the masses. There's a big structural change there at Constantine that was, I love wandering old church buildings. I love it. I love cathedrals and things. But, the aesthetic is amazing, right? Or the age. But I'm reminded again that basically Christians worship in a building rather than out in the natural world. I mean, if I could have my druthers, I'd much rather be in the forest worshiping than I would in a building. That's just me in my old age, I guess. But structural changes, the Reformation brought structural changes, and Zwingli and his iconoclastic band would bust out stained glass windows and everything would become very bare and stark. And then the Puritans come along and everything is supposed to hurt. The wooden benches are supposed to hurt. If you can't sit there for 4 hours on your little tiny tailbone and praise Jesus, you got a problem. You're going to burn in hell, Yeah. The modern architecture, churches and modern architecture don't impress me, and now we've moved to the warehouse church. To me, that's the end of the line. When you have church in a friggin' warehouse, you're at the end of the line, because now it's nothing more than a great big grand stage entertainment facility. As you said earlier, it's church the musical this Sunday. When join us as we praise the Heavenly Father. Yeah. Oh, God. Now I feel like I have to take my own shower again.
It's interesting because I wish I had the video clip here to play. But in that Church Outside the Walls series I was talking about, we interviewed Wayne Jacobson, who's written several books. He was very influential on writing The Shack. And one of the things that he had said is that if you seek the reality of church, you'll never find it. He goes, but if you seek Jesus, you will find other people that are walking along with him. And he says that's when you find the reality of church. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, for me, and I say this to visitors that I have, when they come to visit here at the house and we're talking about Jesus, I said, this is church.
Yeah.
What we're doing right here, the three of us, is church.
Yes.
When you gather in the name of Jesus to do the work of the Lord, that's church.
Yeah. It's funny because it falls right into what my friend David Fredrickson had said. He goes, isn't it odd that he goes, you can show up at a place on Sunday morning and every Sunday a place that's designated church, and now you've gone to church. He goes, on the other hand, Friday night, I could be hanging out with some believing friends. We could have an amazing conversation in a restaurant, maybe with a handful of us, maybe even lead the waitress to Christ. But we didn't have church because we weren't in this designated place on Sunday morning that's called church. And I thought that was a good observation on his part.
Well, there was a period of time, and I go back and forth. I do. Right now, I attend a Sunday morning congregational meeting, but I go back and forth, and I spent probably 6-7 years not going anywhere on Sunday morning. And friends of mine that still talk to me, I lost a lot of friends over it. I really did.
Yeah.
But friends of mine that still talk to me said, well, are you going to church? Or where do you go to church? Or have you gone back to church? Or, questions like that. And I would say, yeah, I went to church several times this week. You did? Where did you go? Well, one was at Costco, and I remember it seems like there's one down at the gas station, and at such and such a restaurant, and because I came, it really took me a couple of years to come to really understand that there's a scripture that means what it says. Whenever two or more are gathered in my name, I'm there in their midst. And so I remember one time in particular, there was this couple in our town that they had stopped attending a Sunday morning fellowship several years before. And I was at the gas station. I was just getting ready to, put the hose back and get in my car and drive off. And they came driving up, and they parked right next to me. And as I do sometimes, I was like, well, if I jump in my car and pretend that I don't see them, I can get out of here. Otherwise, if I stay, I'm in for a half-hour conversation. And I immediately dismissed that thought and said, because I was trying to come to the understanding that when two or more are gathered, we're having church, if you will. And so okay, well, this is not a coincidence that they drove up. They get out of their car. Jim, it's so good to see you. We exchange pleasantries and hugs and whatever. And then I find out that certain things in their life are falling apart.
Yeah.
And they had been asking God to bring somebody that could talk to them. And we had church.
Yeah.
I mean, we had church for a half hour.
Yeah.
And no, we didn't break bread and drink the cup. No, we didn't, I didn't do the cross and the blessing and, but we talked to each other on a deep level that met a need, and we both drove away knowing that the Lord was in our midst, if you will. And I think that we have to come to learn that lesson, that there are not coincidences. I still, sometimes in the grocery store, still duck down an aisle, hoping not to see somebody. But that's still my issue. I'm still being healed, if you will.
All right. It's all right.
It's all right. especially if I have a 6-pack of beer in my cart, It's like,
uh-oh.
Certain people, I don't want to see that.
Right. Well, move over to Milwaukee. That ain't going to be a problem at all.
Oh my gosh, yes. I have some pastor friends in Milwaukee, and I know the first place they took me to was the brewery.
Yeah, it'd almost be like, what? You don't drink beer? Get out of town.
Exactly.
Our baseball team's called the Brewers, for crying out loud.
And it wasn't Milwaukee Light.
Exactly.
Well, they can ask me, and I'll honestly answer them. No, I don't drink beer. No, I don't.
Yeah, exactly. Those of you who can't see, he panned his camera over to his bar over in his apartment. That's funny.
I don't drink beer.
But I think, Jim, you're hitting on something really significant. Is that we talk about how it all begins at the cross. Everything it always goes back to the cross. And so even when we talk about community, it begins with a laying down of our lives for each other. And So as I'm thinking about what is it we're really longing for, is that not really what we yearn for? Is people who we lay down our lives for each other with. And that doesn't necessarily take a formula, format, or some kind of structure or thing that we build in that sense, but relationships where I lay down my life for you or you lay down your life for me. That's kind of my thoughts on it. Is it, do we kind of focus the wrong way when we look towards, okay, I got to find this thing called church to join, versus who is Father connecting me with that I'm supposed to lay down my life for them, to pour into them, whatever that is. And it's usually going to line up with your gift set. You know, the way you're designed, the talents you have, the design you have is usually, just as Jim, we're helping those people untangle in the questions they were having. You were the answer to their prayer in that area. I don't know, just some thoughts that I'm having on it. Kind of goes back to how the kingdom of God is invisible. And I wonder if maybe we focus too much on something that now before I go too far down that road, let me say this. If you have people walking together, loving each other, that's going to be visible in that sense. But in the sense of like, we establish this organization, put a name on it. And I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying that maybe we put a little too much emphasis on that side of it and saying this is church, rather than on the side of laying down our lives for each other, and however that looks, however Father chooses to connect that.
Well, I think I do have a thought about that, and I was just kind of going back and forth in my mind of whether I would share this. How this whole podcast came about is kind of an example of what you're talking about, Loren. I had been thinking for a long time that I'd like to do a podcast. Now, here's the thing. Here's my personality. My personality is such that I would only be good for one or maybe two podcasts, and I would either lose interest or I just lose the motivation. And that's the way I am with almost everything in life. I need a partner who will keep me on task. Like, come on, Jim, it's time to do the podcast. Come on, Jim, it's time to go fishing. Come on, Jim, it's time to, whatever. Go down, go to the gym and go through our series of exercises. It's like, so any rate, so I'm thinking, well, who is the guy that I could do a podcast with that I really would enjoy, because we think a lot alike. And I said, I know, my friend Loren. There's a guy, he has the technical ability, but he also, our journeys are so parallel that I think we'd have a lot of fun just sharing. So I pick up the phone to call you, Loren, and you like laughed. And my first thought is like, why is he laughing at this idea? And then you said, Jim, you're not going to believe it, but I have Michael Harden sitting right here in my living room. And just 20 minutes ago, he said, have you ever thought about doing a podcast? What about the three of us doing it? Okay. The way I look at things is that's a God orchestration. I could have called you 2 days before because it was on my mind it had been on my mind for a couple of months, and Michael wouldn't have been there. I could have called you a month later and Michael wouldn't have been there, and you may not have remembered that Michael asked you. Or the other thing that could have happened is because Michael had asked you 20 minutes before, you may have said to him, yeah, let's do it. And the two of you would have been doing it, and I wouldn't have been a part of it.
Right.
So I think part of understanding how this unseen part of the kingdom of God works is that I've just come to the conclusion there are no coincidences. There are God ordained happenings that just seem like David going and taking lunch to his brothers, and God says, I got something bigger going on today, but I'll let you know about it when it happens, you know? And I kind of like living that way. I kind of like, I don't need everything spelled out. As soon as I wake up in the morning, it's like, okay, God, put it on my iPad on my things to do of all the things that are going to be kingdom stuff that I'm going to do today. It's like,
right.
I like walking down the road and bumping into these things. And I think it's an awesome way to live. And to me, that's the excitement of church now. The excitement of church is not going into the building and sitting there and seeing, oh, they got a new bass player today. I wonder how he is. That's exciting. It's like, in other words, nothing changes,
Yeah. It's so funny too, talking about how the podcast came about. It was funny too, because Michael was originally going to be staying with somebody else, a friend of ours in the DFW area, but his schedule was booked. So he asked me if he could stay over at my house. And even when that happened, I remember thinking, I think God's in this. There's a God thing going on here.
You guys are trying to blame God for our folly.
Yeah, exactly.
I do too. I think that way. There's a wonderful slogan in the 12-step tradition, and the slogan goes like this: there's no such thing as a coincidence. It's just God maintaining God's anonymity. And that's my view.
That's really good.
Of the way the Father interacts with the entirety of creation. If people say, is God an interventionist? I say, absolutely not. He doesn't sit up there and then wait to do miracles from time to time. He is actively involved in every last quark and cell and galaxy. He is, by the power of the energy of the Spirit, he is actively involved in all of creation, all of life. And the miracles just happen to be the things that we see, but they're happening around us all the time. The miracle of life.
Yeah.
The things going on behind the scenes to prepare us for something that's coming. I mean, it's like the rug with the beautiful pattern on top, but you flip it over and it's like all the crazy weaving, and that's how we see our lives, is all that crazy weaving. And we just have to trust that the Father is turning our story into a work of art, a poem.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. I think you just hit on why I've always loved the movie Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Because I always was going, I feel like there's something deeply spiritual behind this. And when you said that, I went, that's why. That's why I love that movie. Because here's this guy who appears to just be randomly living life, and yet everything is woven together like this beautiful tapestry.
Yeah.
And at the end of his life, all the people that he's touched and changed and influenced and all of that, just because of the loving person that he is. And I love that it's what you just described, Michael, is that it's, and Jim, like you were saying, there's no coincidence. It's like God is, how much of even just the insanity, the things that we've gone through that are just seem like they're insane, later become a toolbox that you're very much glad you have.
Oh man, that's so true. But that's only if we learn the lessons. I mean, I have to admit, for a lot of my life, I'd go through things and I didn't learn the lesson. I just tended to want to blame somebody or this or that, but I didn't learn the lesson. Now, when I go through shit, it's like, where's my notebook? What am I supposed to learn here? Because I'm done with that. I'm done with these old habits, done with these old ways of thinking, done with these old lifestyles. That's just done out with the old. Just boom. So I've been trying to be a good student of life.
Yeah, that's really good, and that ties right into the community, because how much more if with each other we're doing the same thing?
Right.
What am I learning in this relationship? What am I? There are so many things. I was just reflecting this morning, just on my own extended family, areas where I was so sure I was right and I was the victim, and they were just so mean and nasty. And now in my 50s, I look back and I'm like, I was the asshole in that one. It's like I wasn't the hero in that story. I was the one who was playing the martyr card, but I was the jerk.
Yeah.
So I think that brings up a valid point, that if we trust Father to put the relationships together, we're going to, on occasion, find ourselves repeatedly coming back into contact with and thus a relationship with someone who on every level rubs us the wrong way.
Yes.
It just happens. And we keep coming up in life. Okay. I was an insurance broker for 18 years. I worked in 4 different offices. And guess what? In all 4 offices, the same person. I don't mean the same name. I don't mean the same gender. I mean the same personality was in all 4 offices. And as I thought back, before I injured my back that caused me to have to change careers, I was in construction. And guess what? That same person worked on most of the construction crews that I worked for. And I'm like, okay, to take what Michael said there, I can either, you know what, I hate those freaking people. Or I can, for some reason, Father keeps putting this person in, this kind of person, this personality into my life. There's got to be something in this that I need to learn. And even if it's just to use, 1 Corinthians 13, even if it's just the unnecessary parts of the body become more necessary, I'm not sure if that's the only lesson I can draw, but I can try it, I just like, okay. So Michael is over here raising his hand and going through contortions because he has something he wants to say.
I'm just laughing my ass off here. Oh no, Jim, I'm agreeing with everything. I'm just thinking of situations I've been in where those are going. It's just like, it made me laugh. It's like, oh Lord. Quite to cool down.
Well, and I think a lot of our audience is probably laughing right now too, because they can think of situations they've been in.
Oh, yeah.
And those are the people that when I see them in the grocery store, I try and duck down the other aisle. It's like, oh my God, there he is. I don't want to see this person.
Man.
And it's like, okay, wait a minute. Wasn't it just 20 minutes ago I was saying that God orchestrates these chance meetings? It's like, okay, maybe I need to talk, maybe I need to connect with this person, so, yeah.
Oh man, I relate. There's so much I want to say that I can't say because I can't incriminate myself.
Exactly.
But go on to say that's part of community too.
Yeah.
That's part of community. That there are unseeming parts of the body that he bestows more abundant honor on.
Yeah, because it's like here's okay. Exposing my weakness here is my thing is I'll engage the conversation with the person because I'm a nice guy, but I really don't care anything about what they're saying. I just want to get out of this conversation as fast as I can. And so I've even watched YouTube videos on like a lawyer on how to end a conversation that's going nowhere, try and come up with my exit strategy, and that's why I'm like sitting here laughing because it's the challenge is, okay, it's one thing to be like, okay, God, I'm going to be a good boy. I'm going to engage this person in the conversation, but that's not the cross. The cross is not only am I going to listen to you, I'm going to see if I have something to build you up, to give to you, to hear the Spirit on, to actually love you, not just look for my exit from this conversation that, frankly, I don't really care about the 20 different kinds of PVC pipe, that exist or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will give you a story, and I will incriminate myself in this story. So when I was pastoring in New York, there was a man in the church that eventually became one of the elders in the church, but he irritated every single person in the whole church. I mean, he just, when he was set in as an elder, there were families that refused to go to church that day to boycott the placement. He just irritated every person. He just had that, I don't know. He got everybody. And one Sunday, I had just finished preaching, hadn't even stepped off the platform yet, and he makes a beeline right down the center aisle, gets in my face and starts talking about something that has nothing to do with the service that morning or the message or anything, and only indirectly had anything to do with the church itself at all. And I lost it. I could not handle it. I was so just boiling. And I just fired back. I said, "Get the F out of my face."
Whoa.
And my microphone was still live.
Oh, dang. Oh, man,
So,
where were you when I was writing that movie script on funny things that happen in church?
Not
Oh,
my
man.
time. No.
So a year later, year and a half, maybe 2 years later, I'm a Vietnam vet. I've had issues with Agent Orange situation, and at the time, I was having tumors appear on my body, and I'd had several of them cut off. I had another one under my arm, and one on the bottom of my foot that had been cut off 3 times and kept coming back, larger. So in church, I said, "You know what, guys? I've got to go in tomorrow morning. I've got to go and have another operation and whatever. I really could use prayer." He jumps up, walks right up to the front and says, "I'm going to pray for you right now."
Wow.
And I'm just like, I don't want this guy praying for me. I don't want him making a show and whatever. And here's his prayer. "Tonight when Jim takes his sock off and looks at his foot, let him see that tumor is completely gone. And then tomorrow when he goes into the hospital and they do a biopsy on it, let them come back with the biopsy that it is a completely different composition than the previous biopsy and not necessary to operate on." To the exact word that he prayed, that's exactly what happened, and I haven't had a tumor since.
Woo!
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, God, you put this guy in my life, and we became friends.
I reckon.
He still irritated me sometimes, and I still had to, under my breath, just go, "Ah!" But for the most part, we became friends. We laughed a lot. We hung out in each other's house and whatever. And I don't really think it was because I got healed when he prayed. I mean, that was as wonderful. I love not having tumors every few months, It's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think it was just that I saw through, underneath his personality that rubs people the wrong way is a man who loves the Lord and who has a simple childlike faith that God does what you ask God to do, you know. Ask me anything, God says. And so he does. He asks anything and it happens. And it's like, so, you know, he's gone on to be with the Lord many, many years ago now. But I always remember both those lessons. It's like, one, I was in my flesh. Two, I was, okay, maybe this guy isn't so bad after all. You know.
That's right.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, what a great practical example about, you know, the less seemly parts being even more, you know, I forget the term it used, but
more necessary.
More necessary, yeah. I mean, and that just kind of blows up our thinking of, I just want to be around people that are just like me. Wow, that's great. Because as you were sharing that, I started thinking about all these people who are completely different than me that ended up, you know, that would even be the type that would rub me the wrong way, that ended up being a blessing to me in one way or another. And then also just wrong judgments I made about people right from the start. Where, you know, I saw that certain personality type that pushes a button in me or something. And so I just put them in that category. Oh, they're this type of person. And then later on, like, discover, wow, they were a tremendous blessing and help to me, you know, and they weren't actually at all like I first had thought they were, you know, just because on the surface level, you know, I had that knee-jerk reaction to their personality type. I've seen that even with people at my job, you know, just people I managed, that there were people I immediately made wrong assessments about who ended up being a tremendous help to me on the job. So yeah, it's very humbling.
Here's a sobering thought. To some people, I'm the less comely person.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, to some people, they look as, oh man, that Jim, oh my God, he just gets to me. It's like, you know, yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember, I don't know if I should say this or not, back when you were pastoring Old Town Christian Center, somebody had left, there was a couple who had left the church, and this is when you were a pastor, and I saw him in the grocery store. Eureka's a small town, Michael, so you'd see a lot of people, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we would, and I said, oh, why haven't seen you at church in a while? And the lady goes, something Jim said offended me.
Oh yeah. Oh, I offended a lot of people. You know, there were people that were offended that I considered our fellowship to be a family and not an army, the army of God marching through the land, you know, and like, we're a family. And it's like, and there were people that are offended about that. And I'm like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You know,
it's true. Wow.
Have another beer. That's
exactly.
what you're going to do.
Michael, you're awfully
a cart
quiet.
full of them in the grocery store.
That's it, man. And I don't care who sees.
Well, guys, that's actually about time. This was fun because conversation, as often happens, went in directions didn't even expect it to go. So, guys, let's start with Jim. Where can people find your book that does hit on some of the things we just talked about?
It does. It's Dying of Thirst on the Bank of the River. It's on Amazon.com.
All right, great. And Michael, your materials also hit on some of this stuff. Where can people find your stuff?
Next to Jim's stuff.
On Amazon.
On YouTube, indeed.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll talk to you all next week.
All right.